All right, we're back together again, and undoubtedly I've heard from a few people lively conversations and some really good learning goes on in these groups, and that's a great thing. There was, this time is set aside for you to ask a couple of questions, and via paper or by putting your hand up in the air. There was a question last week, I wasn't here, and so I'm going to deal with it this week, and that was, in the New Testament, baptism is compared to circumcision. And in the Old Testament, by the way, that's the book of Colossians. In the Old Testament, circumcision is the way in which the men are identified as those that are in the family of God. And so the question was, how did girls come into the family? And the reality is, they came in through their husband. And again, for us, this is a very foreign concept. We do not understand how the Middle East works. And I can tell you that our missionaries that do work in the Middle East, do you know the first person they hope to convert? The chief. The chieftain of the tribe actually speaks for the community. And this has been a historical phenomenon. In fact, it shouldn't be surprising that when Constantine, who was not a believer, emperor, he has a mother and a wife who become believers, and then he becomes a believer, and then all of a sudden everything changes. And now the empire first makes Christianity an allowable religion, and then it becomes the religion of the Roman Empire. So I share that with you. That's the notion of how it worked in the Old Testament. The question that came up today, which is a great question, day 2. Can't read all of it, but let me just see if I can get this. The 2 goats used in the Day of Atonement sacrifices symbolize Christ. One goat sacrifice and one released. Okay, yeah, thank you, the scapegoat. Yeah, so this is, whoever said, does this represent, and I'm assuming you went through this in your study. There is an entire Lifelight study, 10-week study on this. And I would highly recommend it at some point. And that is to look at the ceremonial life of the Old Testament and see and understand it as, here it is, prefiguring God's ultimate work. Now, I use that word prefiguring because we can see it's something that's done that is supposed to give, if you will, evidence of what's going to happen later. And we see that in the New Testament being confirmed. In John chapter 3, you might remember when Jesus is talking, he talks about even as Moses raised up the snake in the wilderness, and those that looked to him were saved, so too the Son of Man will be raised up, and all who look at the Son of Man will be saved. So Jesus is showing us what the Old Testament acts, what their value was. Their value always was about God. Always about what God is doing and will be doing. Very, very important. I've stumped many a person and say, Moses a Christian or not? The answer is yes. Moses is a Christian. Moses is one whose hope is in the Messiah. God's sacrificial acts on behalf of humanity. And this is an important distinction, again, about the, if you will, the biblical understanding of God's work, the narrative, that is distinct from other religions. Do you realize that circumcision wasn't just, circumcision was all over the place. In fact, I think I said in the video last week that, there very few people did not circumcise. But circumcision, just like these other activities, had a different meaning. And here's the meaning. Prefiguring. You do this, people, my people, to remind you of who you are and who I am, to remind you of what I am doing. So if undoubtedly you're saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, if they were killing their goat, if they were slaughtering their, first fruit, their best, who's doing? Doesn't that sound like a good Lutheran who actually says, I'm the one who's given the tithe, the 10%. I'm the one who is sacrificing. And guess what? The stupidity of the Old Testament person is being lived out today. Because it's not about us. It's not your tithe. In fact, one scholar politely said, it's really not about what you give, it's about what you're going to keep. And sooner or later, when you realize it's not yours, you're stealing, period. We are stealing when we don't live in obedience. Then we realize it's all his. So in the religions of the day, you slaughtered animals to appease an angry God. You slaughtered an animal to appease a God who was distracted, to get his attention, in order to have crops, or to have children, or to win a war. That is not the biblical narrative. The biblical narrative, rather, is God gave us these things to do so that we can be reminded that we're in his family. I always am just so struck by the first death in this world. It's not at the hands of people. The first death, we can't even fathom death being brought into the world. Because, we're the ones that, stepped on ants. We took fireflies and put them into a glass container and we've taken firecrackers and put them where they shouldn't be put. And we have slaughtered humanity, and it's going on right now. We have no idea how contrary death is to God's plan. And he is the one who brought it forward for us. He did it with Adam and Eve. He did it through his son. And so it's a great question. All of these things, and we don't have time to get into the details, but all these things are prefiguring. So therefore, the lamb that is slaughtered, the lamb that is let loose, this is all part of giving people a chance. You hold on to this. And it was an oral tradition. They didn't have things written down. You hold on to this. When things are tough, God is going to get you through this. He has given us many examples of it. Were there any other things that came up? This was a great section. It's going to introduce a whole lot of other really good sections within our conversation in Romans. Anything else that jumped up? No. All right. Well, boy, I'll tell you what. I was meeting with Steve this morning just to kind of get things finalized for Sunday's Bible class. Highly, highly recommend that you set aside discipleship hour. We're going to get a little bit of a chance to kind of think about who are we as Lutheran Christians? What is the Reformation? What did the Reformation mean for all of Christendom? And so we'll be doing that in Discipleship Hour Sunday. And on Saturday, it's not too late. It's not too late to please consider being part of this conversation about these truths, about who we are as our confession. It's a great way to meet people who are exploring our church, who are guests here, And you may know somebody who actually came in to membership without going to the orientation, which is a no-no. We want to encourage people to actually be able to understand our conversation. It's a great way to get to know people as well. So with that, let's close in the family prayer. Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. On your way out, on the right-hand side, there are Low Country Bash cards. We order those for we to hand them out, which assumes that we are going to RSVP. So if you haven't heard from your shepherd yet, you will soon. There's also been an e-letter that was sent out yesterday by Sweet Gladys. Please, please, help the ministry team do their work. We had over 250 people show up last year. We almost ran out of food. We've got to RSVP so we can get a general idea of what we're looking like. And Mary and I, we know people in our neighborhood that really love oysters. It's free food, for goodness sake. There's no expectation, no nothing. So please help us out. Sign up either at the desk, there's a sheet there, online, or talk with Gladys.